The 2022 MLS season is ready to kick off. Preseason camp is officially underway, which means we are counting down the days until opening day. I have a video that's going to get you completely ready for the MLS season, whether this is your first time playing MLS or you played last year and you're coming back for year number 2. We're going to get you everything that you need to know. I've got a timeline for you of when everything is going to come. I've got the biggest differences between MLS and Europe. I've got the biggest differences from last year to this year in MLS itself. First thing we're going to do is go over the timeline. So as you can see, I have DC United's schedule pulled up here. Opening day for all teams is either the 26th or the 27th, I believe. DC starts the day before, so they start on the 26th, all in the same game week. Every team should be playing on every single game week. And then you can see things are pretty spaced out here. So we've got 3 games in March, 5 games in April, 5 games in May, and then we hit this break from May 28th till June 18th. Typically, this is when they're going to play the U.S. Open Cup later stages, so they don't have any MLS teams playing in order to get that tournament completed. That's basically the MLS version of the FA Cup. After we get back on track, then we have 6 games in July, 6 games in August, 4 in September, and 2 in October. So the end of the season is much earlier this season. It's October the 9th is the final day. Last year, I think it was the first weekend in November. So it's a month earlier. The season starts about a month and a half earlier from February 26th. So everything is kind of shifted up a little bit in order to get everything in. So that's the general timeline for MLS. Next, we're going to go over the biggest differences between the MLS and Europe. A lot of you guys are used to playing Champion Europe, Challenger Europe. We're going to go over, there are some differences and some things that you need to keep in mind whenever you start to come over to the Champion America division and specifically the MLS. First thing that you want to keep in mind is the sheer unpredictability of everything that goes on in MLS. MLS is a crazy league. Year to year, it seems like nothing ever stays the same. We did a video on the unpredictability of teams a little while ago, so go ahead and check that out. But even when it comes to the players themselves, unpredictability is wild. With that being said, a lot of times you can get some bargain deals for some really good talented players in MLS. So don't be afraid if a player is not priced highly. That does not mean they're not a good player. It seems like just about everybody in MLS is talented and nobody's super talented and nobody's not talented. They're all kind of in the same little pool and guys just have really incredible years. Obviously, there is talent differences between players, but a lot of times you can get guys that are super talented at very discount prices. So as an example, I pulled up Hany Mukhtar here. We're actually going to compare 3 players. So I have Hany Mukhtar, I have Johnny Russell, and I have Carlos Vela. So all 3 of these guys are studs. All 3 of them are going for 0.4, 0.499, and 0.5. So all of them are kind of in the same range. Vela's a little bit cheaper than the other 2, but generally they're about the same range. They're all studs. You can see some seriously high scores here, seriously high scores here, some good scores here. He's been hurt a lot too, so that's why his price is a little lower. My main point is last year there was a gigantic price difference between these 3 players. So when you pull up the actual price charts, Hany Mukhtar was going for 0.03, 0.04 for parts of the summer, and then he dipped up a little bit and came back down to 0.1, and he was still, even towards the end of the season, not going for 0.2. Johnny Russell, his big dip was to 0.125, so still basically 3 times as expensive as Hany Mukhtar, and then he dipped up a little bit, and he ended the season right around this 0.2 mark. So they kind of ended the season right around the same spot. Carlos Vela, he was going for 0.4, guys. Like, he was going for 8 times as much as Hany Mukhtar was going for. And they're basically putting out the same. And in fact, Vela had a worse season because he was injured for so much of it. And he ended the season still at this 0.2 range. So they've all kind of ended right around 0.2, and they've all kind of doubled in price since the end of the season. But they had massively different prices during the season itself. So just because you see a Hany Mukhtar is 0.03, if he's putting up numbers, go and buy him. Eventually, the market will react. The other thing that you want to keep in mind is the pure travel. So in Europe, you're traveling maybe a bus ride, maybe an hour or two bus ride, depending on the country that you're in. Most of the teams are pretty well clumped together. There's not that much travel that goes on. In the United States, the travel cannot be underestimated. You have teams from New England flying to Los Angeles that take 6 hours to fly. That is a big deal. MLS teams are much better at home. So when you're going through and picking your lineups, make sure you keep in mind the home versus the away. It may not make that much of a difference in Europe, but it's a big deal here in the MLS. Two more quick differences for you from if you played MLS last year, things that you should be looking out for this year that'll be a little bit different. So number one is the expanded schedule. So last year we had a ton of midweek games. Everything was kind of compressed and smashed as close as we possibly could. So there was a lot of rotation. There was a lot of guys getting minutes that maybe weren't quite ready to get minutes. There were some starters that got DNPs because they were resting, because you just can't play midweek every single week. This year the schedule spans out much more. So there's only 5 midweek games throughout the entire season, and no team plays 2 midweek games in one single month. A lot of starters are going to play the entirety of the games now, as opposed to getting a few DNPs here and there. So you want to prioritize older players that are typically going to need more rest. They're going to get more rest this year than they did last year. And you want to prioritize starters. You don't really want that sub guy that is kind of a rotational starter. He's not going to get nearly as many minutes this year as he did last year. The other thing to keep in mind is very small and subtle, but it is something to still keep in mind, is that there are 28 teams now in the MLS as opposed to 27. So that meant last year there could only be 13 games, 26 teams could play in any given week, and one team always had a bye week. So you kind of had to rotate your guys a little bit if your team was the one that was on a bye week. Now with 28 teams, we don't have that bye week anymore. There are 14 games for all the full game weeks every MLS team will be playing, which again should help you be able to reduce the size of your bench. You won't need quite as many subs as you did maybe last year. Hopefully that was helpful for you guys. We are pumped to get the season started. Until the next time, Vamos United.